To mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, the BBC hosted the Today programme from Auschwitz and devoted a day of broadcasting across several channels to the 80th anniversary of its liberation. But as fate, or rather Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, decreed, the event in Poland was overshadowed by a much bigger one taking place in Gaza. This was wholly Netanyahu's fault. He had stalled for 2 days on his part of the bargain around a second hostage release. This was to open up the Netzarim corridor, which bisects Gaza and which allowed Palestinians to return to their homes in North Gaza. When the Israeli forces eventually pulled back, they released a tidal wave of hundreds of thousands marching on foot with what few possessions they had left. They marched in search of family members who in all probability had been killed, and to homes that were certainly nothing more than piles of concrete. This produced an uncomfortable clash of images, even to a Western audience that had become so inured to Palestinian suffering. As world statesmen gathered in the former concentration camp, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who had endured 15 months of genocidal bombing, starvation and disease at the hands of a state born in the aftermath of the Holocaust marched for hours back into northern Gaza. But there were two notable absentees from Poland. The first and most obvious was the president of the country whose forces had actually liberated the nasty death camp, Vladimir Putin of Russia. The second absentee was Netanyahu himself, who has relentlessly plucked the strings of German guilt over the Holocaust and repeatedly used it to justify Israel's many attempts to ethnically cleanse Palestine of all Palestinians. But there were practical reasons for Netanyahu's no-show. He very much fears being arrested under the terms of the warrant issued by the International Criminal Court for war crimes in Gaza. He also had to attend an Israeli court hearing on multiple charges of corruption. Israel's main television channels didn't go into the Queen is dead mode as the BBC did. They continued their normal programming schedules throughout the day. The hypocrisy of marking a significant anniversary in Jewish history in this casual way, and the way it contrasts to greeting every criticism of Israel with charges of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, did not go unnoticed at home. No one has forgotten the shameful stunt Netanyahu pulled when he put yellow stars on Israel's delegation to the UN in the aftermath of the 7th of October Hamas attack, a stunt condemned by the chairman of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial, as dishonoring both the victims of genocide and the State of Israel. As the day wore on, the magnitude of events in Gaza only grew. But the BBC's answer to this crisis of news values was Soviet. It simply blotted out the news that didn't fit the party line. After a day's mature reflection, BBC News at 10 gave 22 minutes to the Holocaust Memorial and just 4 minutes to Gaza. Monday's commemoration was framed as a message to the world of today. One speaker after another in Poland said the lessons of the Holocaust should not die with its last remaining survivors, not least because there are record levels of anti-Semitism around the world. One cannot disagree with either of these statements, and yet the glaring parallels between what the Nazis did to the Jews and what the Jews are now doing to the Palestinians in Gaza and occupied West Bank over the past 15 months, parallels that are not just polemical, but the basis of two legal actions at the highest international courts, were Monday's elephant in the room. The debate about Israel's actions in Gaza is just as lively in Israel itself. Two Israeli Holocaust historians, Daniel Blattman and Amos Goldberg, have drawn chilling comparisons and concluded, although what is happening in Gaza is not Auschwitz, it's of the same family, a family of genocide. The clash between the two events on the same day did something other than just overshadow the commemoration of the liberation of the Nazi death camp. Monday, 22nd of January, was in the Islamic calendar the 27th day of Rajab, which until this week was commemorated by Muslims the world over for two other events. Al-Isra wal-Miraj is the night when the Prophet Muhammad was transported by angels from Mecca to Al-Aqsa Mosque before ascending to heaven and returning to Mecca. This journey during which the prophet met Moses, Abraham, Adam and Jesus, was instructed by God and is a pillar of the Muslim faith. It links Muslims to Al-Aqsa. This is an article of faith, but a fact of Arab history also occurred on the same day, which again links Arabs to Jerusalem. It was a day in 1187 when Saladin liberated the city of Jerusalem from Lord Balan of Ibelin, ending nearly a century of Crusader occupation. Now Netanyahu has added a third memory to the 27th day of Rajab. This is the first day in the history of the conflict when Palestinians have exercised their right of return to lands from which Israel is bending every sinew to expel them. All three events reinforce the Palestinian claim to Jerusalem as their national capital and the Muslim belief that Jerusalem is a seminal part of their faith. The scenes this week of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians on their long march home with everything they have on their back are epic and historical because of the resonance this event will have for every generation of Palestinian to come. Gaza is proving that the Palestinian right to return is not only possible, but within reach. The returnees are joyous, defiant, and determined. Northern Gaza suffered the longest and hardest period of occupation, the full 471 days of war, of all of Gaza. It was a place Israel tried to clear repeatedly of Hamas fighters, and then of all its citizens, by trying to starve them out. We can put figures on this. At least 5,000 people have been killed or are missing, with another 9,500 wounded. These casualties were intended, they were planned. This act of ethnic cleansing campaign was actually given a name. It was called the General's Plan, and it began in early October 2024. The images of Gaza's devastation will burn a historical hole in Israel's foundational story of a state born from Holocaust survivors. The end of the siege of North Gaza, however temporary, will go down in Palestinian history very much as the relief of Leningrad did in Russian history in the Second World War. That also happened on the 27th of January. This display of human resilience against overwhelming odds and in the midst of Hiroshima-scale destruction is the best reply Gaza can make to Netanyahu, to the international community, and now to US President Donald Trump. It's no accident of timing that on the eve of this historic event, Trump mused, in his deceptively casual way he has of making deeply calculated moves, that 1.5 million Palestinians should be cleaned out of Gaza and relocated to Jordan and Egypt to make way for the reconstruction of the Strip. This aligns with Netanyahu's request in the early days of the war to his right-hand man Ron Dermer to consider ways of thinning out the population of Gaza. Happily, at the moment, there is little chance of this happening. Within hours, both Jordan and Egypt have restated their rejection of any population transfer. They reject population transfer out of no great sympathy for the Palestinians. It is primarily because both states know that a large influx of Palestinians could become explosive. Both Jordan and Egypt consider this an existential problem for their regimes. Albania's name was then quickly raised, but then rejected by Tirana within hours. In his first term, Trump failed to sell to the region what he called the deal of the century, which was an attempt to bury Palestinian rights in a grave paved over by trade deals and much concrete beside. In the second term, his attempt to sell ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to their neighbours has stalled before it even started. This is even more significant. It means that Palestinians are here to stay in historic Palestine. This has been achieved amid unprecedented personal suffering, but the Palestinian people have, once and for all, affirmed their connection to this land. This is the triumph of the human spirit over industrialised oppression. It too is the lesson of the Holocaust.